It started like any other school day. The sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the quiet little town of Crestwood. Parents rushed to get their children ready. Hurried breakfasts were eaten, and backpacks were slung over small shoulders. For the students of Crestwood Elementary's 5th grade class, it was just another morning. A few of them grumbled about homework. Some laughed about a joke from the day before, and others simply stared out the school bus windows, watching the familiar roads pass by. None of them knew that, in just a few hours, they would be gone, all of them. 27 children, 1 teacher, vanished. No warning, no signs of struggle, no evidence left behind. The school day had started normally. Attendance was taken, lessons began. But by lunchtime, the classroom was empty. The chairs were still neatly tucked under their desks. A few pencil cases were left open, and an unfinished game of tic-tac-toe sat on one of the desks. But there were no students, no teacher, just silence. At first, people thought it was a prank, maybe a poorly planned field trip that hadn't been recorded. But as the minutes turned to hours, and the hours turned into days, panic set in. Search teams scoured the entire town. Helicopters flew overhead. Divers searched nearby lakes and rivers. Every door was knocked on. Every abandoned building was checked. Every possible lead was followed. But there was nothing. It was as if the entire class had been erased from existence. Parents were shattered. Some refused to leave the school, waiting, hoping that their child would suddenly reappear. Others searched on their own, refusing to accept that there were no answers. As time passed, the story faded from the headlines. The town became a place of whispered legends and unanswered questions. Then, 27 years later, a desperate mother, one who had never stopped searching for her son, noticed something, a detail so small, so easily overlooked, that it had been missed for nearly 3 decades. And that's when everything changed. For 27 years, Margaret Holloway had lived in a cycle of grief, hope, and frustration. Her son Daniel had been one of the 27 children who vanished that day. He had been 10 years old, full of life, with a laugh that could light up a room. She still remembered the morning he disappeared, how he had forgotten his lunchbox and ran back inside to grab it, how he had waved at her before getting on the bus, how she had gone about her day, never once imagining it would be the last time she saw him. The years had been unkind. The town had moved on, but Margaret never had. Some parents of the missing children left Crestwood, unable to bear the painful memories. Others stayed, but learned to live with the loss, convincing themselves that their children were gone forever. But Margaret couldn't let go. She searched, obsessively, following every lead, no matter how ridiculous it seemed. Some called her delusional. Others pitied her, but she didn't care. She needed answers. Then, late one evening, while looking through an old box of evidence she had collected over the years, she saw it, something so small, so easily dismissed, yet it sent chills down her spine. It was a class photo, taken just days before the disappearance. She had seen it hundreds of times before, but now, under the dim glow of her desk lamp, she noticed something she had never paid attention to. In the far right corner of the picture, almost out of frame, there was a shadow, a blurred, distorted figure, standing just beyond the children. Her hands trembled as she brought the photo closer. It didn't look like a teacher or a staff member. The figure was wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. Its face was indistinct, as though it had been smeared. But it was there, watching. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. How had no one seen this before? She quickly flipped through the rest of the items in the box, searching for anything that might connect to the strange figure. Then, her heart stopped. A drawing, a simple childlike sketch. It had been found inside Daniel's desk at school after the disappearance. She had dismissed it at the time as just another one of his doodles. But now it felt like something much more. It showed a row of children, drawn with shaky crayon lines. And behind them, looming just like in the photograph, was the same dark figure. Margaret's hands went cold. She had spent years chasing ghosts, following dead ends, pleading with authorities to reopen the case. But now, for the first time in nearly 3 decades, she felt something different, a lead. She needed to know what this was, who this was. But she wasn't the only one still watching. Margaret's heart pounded as she clutched the drawing. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Had Daniel seen something before he vanished? Had he tried to tell her? She traced the jagged lines of the shadowy figure, her fingers shaking. If this thing, whatever it was, had been there before the children disappeared, then maybe, just maybe, it was the key to everything. She needed help. She reached out to Tom Wren, a retired detective who had once led the investigation into the missing class. He had been the only officer who seemed to care, the only one who had treated the parents with compassion instead of empty words. But after years of dead ends, even he had given up. When Margaret called, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "Margaret, it's been 27 years, he said. "There's nothing left to find." She hesitated before speaking. "I found something," she said. "Something we missed." There was a long silence. Then, finally he sighed. "Come over." Margaret wasted no time. She arrived at his small, cluttered home, spreading out the old photo and the drawing on his kitchen table. Tom leaned in, adjusting his glasses. His tired eyes widened slightly when he saw the shadowy figure. "Strange," he murmured. "I don't remember seeing this before." She watched as he flipped the photo over, searching for a date. Then, almost absently, he reached for a stack of old case files on a nearby shelf. He pulled out a worn folder and opened it, revealing a series of reports and witness statements from the original investigation. He thumbed through them quickly, but then his hands froze. A different class photo, another group of children, another school, and in the background, that same shadowy figure. Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. "That's not possible." Tom didn't respond. His face had gone pale. Slowly he pulled out more reports. Cases of missing children from decades before Crestwood. In every photo, buried in the edges, barely noticeable, was that same figure. "This isn't just Crestwood," Tom whispered. "This has happened before." Margaret's fingers dug into the table. "Then why didn't anyone notice?" "No one was looking for it," he muttered. Until now, a cold shiver ran down her spine. This wasn't just a local tragedy. It was something older, deeper, something that had been happening for longer than anyone realized. But why? Tom scanned through the files, stopping on an old newspaper clipping from the 1950s. His brow furrowed. "There was one survivor," he murmured. Margaret's breath hitched. "Who?" He turned the paper toward her. A black and white image of a frail-looking elderly man accompanied the article. "Henry Calloway," Tom read aloud. "He was the only child to ever return." Margaret's pulse quickened. If someone had made it back, they had to know something. "Where is he now?" Tom's jaw tightened. "Still in town," he said. "But there's a reason no one talks to him. Henry Calloway lived on the outskirts of Crestwood, in a run-down house buried behind overgrown trees. He was reclusive, rarely seen in town, but when Margaret and Tom knocked on his door, he answered almost immediately, as if he had been expecting them. His eyes, clouded with age, flickered over them before landing on the photo in Margaret's hands. The shadowy figure. "You've seen it," Margaret said. Henry's face darkened. "You shouldn't have come here. Please," she begged. "I need to know what happened." For a moment, he hesitated. Then with a deep, weary sigh, he stepped aside and let them in. His house was filled with old newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and faded photographs, each one connected to missing children over the years. "It doesn't take them all," Henry said finally, his voice rough. "Just enough to be forgotten." Margaret swallowed. "What is it?" Henry shook his head. "Not a person, not a ghost. It's older than that. It waits, watches. And when the time is right, it takes them somewhere else." "Where, Tom?" Ahaked. Henry's expression was grim. "No one knows." Margaret clenched her fists. "Then how did you get back?" For the first time, Henry looked truly haunted. "I never left," he whispered. "I hid. I stayed behind while the others, they were taken. I don't know where. I don't know why. But I know this. Once it marks you, it doesn't forget." A heavy silence filled the room. Margaret felt sick. Her son had been marked. All the children had been. Then Henry said something that made her blood run cold. "It's still here." Margaret and Tom exchanged a look. The air in the room felt heavier now, charged with something unseen. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered. A shadow passed by the window. Margaret's breath hitched. Tom reached for his gun out of instinct, but Henry only shook his head. "Bullets won't stop it." Margaret's mind raced. If the thing that had taken Daniel was still out there, if it had been watching all these years, was it still hunting?